So I think what our plan was that we would each of the three of us would kind of talk about a couple of key things from our experience in terms of working with volunteers, and then open it up for discussion about issues that you may run into or best practices that you may have found in your own volunteer work. So do you want to go ahead and start?
Sure, I can start. I think for me, the 3 points, I'll try to think of sort of three things. As you're looking to build ties to volunteers across the community, I think the first thing is recognizing the range of the community. So for me, I think it's very easy to think, okay, well, this is where I am in my stage of life, and this is the kind of events that I think that Chicago alumni like to do, so we're going to do that. And I think it's important to sort of melding it with my second, meet people where they are, so recognize, you know, especially in the areas that I've been, the broad range. We have graduate students, we have parents, we have much older alumni, and sort of what are their interests, and find ways to cater to all of those people so that you really are saying, you know, obviously probably there are young alumni who don't want to go apple picking or go to a pumpkin patch, but there are people who won't come to an alumni event if they can't bring their kids. So I think figuring out a way that all of those people can plug into your community is a really big one. And then also making it reasonable and manageable for the people to participate. So saying, you know, and I know Amy's going to touch on this, but being really upfront about what your expectations are and making it so that, you know, somebody who has, you know, a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old can reasonably plan an event that they can then bring those children to, or somebody who is just new to a job and is trying to figure everything out can still find a way to participate. I think for me, those have been sort of the most important and effective things to broadening the horizon of an alumni club and really sort of building the base. So.
Do you want to go, Greg, or do you want me to go?
Go ahead. Yeah. I'm making my notes.
Okay, so I think one of the things in terms of, I know one of the challenges that a lot of us have run into is how you reach beyond the one club that you're already involved in and bring in new volunteers. So in some cities there may be a Booth alumni club and then a university alumni club, and how do you bridge that gap? Or there may be the folks who are involved in the alumni schools committee, and there may be a separate alumni club, and how do you reach out to them? So in that area, I guess one of the things that I've seen that seems to work well is to make that outreach intentional and not have it be sort of haphazardly once a year somebody says, hey, aren't there some Booth alumni in town that we should be contacting? And instead appointing one person from the board whose job it is to reach out to the Booth alumni in your town, or whose job it is to actively think about how you can get more med school alumni involved and things like that, and make it more intentional, and have one person whose job it is to do that, and not the president, because the president has lots of other things to do. And it seems like when the presidents say they're going to do it, they just have too many other things on their plate. And it's an important responsibility, and it can be a great thing for a vice president or someone who would like to be president at some point to work on instead. In terms, again, of reaching out to different alumni groups, one of the things that I think we have seen be successful is if there is an established club, so if there's a Booth Alumni Club in your town, inviting their representative to the meeting of the Chicago Alumni Club Board can be really helpful to establish sort of a formal relationship. Also co-sponsoring events, which is something that we did in Chicago between the Booth Alumni Club and the University of Chicago Alumni Club. Was helpful because then it exposes all those other alumni to the larger alumni club. One issue that I think we ran into when we were trying to do outreach into different alumni club populations was sort of the stereotyping. So assuming that, well, if alumni are young, they're so focused on their careers that they don't have time to come to events, or they must only want to do happy hours, or, oh, if it's a Booth alumni never want to come unless there's networking. You know, like SSA alumni. Well, how do we get SSA alumni involved? Obviously, SSA alumni could never be interested in networking, right? So there would never be a way that you could possibly reach multiple groups of alumni. So I think it's important to not stereotype. And one thing we did in Chicago, we had a program committee chair who was really dedicated to collecting data. And so he got data from our staff person about the breakdown of alumni in Chicago. And they could tell us, you know, what the age groups were, the zip codes where they lived, and things like that were really helpful to us in thinking about our programming. And then we also did a lot of surveys of people. You know, why did you come to this event? What did you think of this event? And we use that to then inform our program decisions instead of having it be a haphazard sort of well, I'm interested in this, so I'll plan a program on it, stopping and thinking about how do we reach new alumni and what they might be interested in. Then in terms of reaching out to new people, another board I'm on, what we did was to we were really interested in diversifying our board. And so we realized that having current board members do outreach to new potential board members was not a way to diversify the board. So instead what we did was we tried to really demystify how you got involved. So we publicized applying for the board pretty widely, and we wrote job descriptions that were very specific and included time commitment expectations for each job, so that you didn't have people saying, oh, well, that sounds like an interesting job, and not knowing what it really entailed. And we also required that people applying for specific jobs talk to the person who currently held the job, so that they could find out what was in it. We were trying to avoid the situation where people say, I'll do this, and then they never do, and they end up feeling disgruntled. And also, again, we wanted to make it so that anybody could get involved, and you didn't have to know someone to figure out how to get into it. And then finally, Lauren mentioned matching the job to the volunteer, which is something we talked about in the session this morning about personality types. That if your club needs a greeter at club events, it's not fair to go up to the guy who really likes to do spreadsheets and say, you need to be the greeter, because unless they want to be the greeter. And making sure that you keep in mind that you want volunteers for the long term, and the goal isn't just how do we make sure we have somebody for next week. You don't want to burn out or turn off people by giving them jobs that they're not well suited for. It's better to spend the time and effort to match them appropriately so that they can continue wanting to contribute.
And to just jump off on the demystifying point, what I think is most interesting about it in some ways is that it works in the way that you get people sort of who will actually do the work, but it also works in attracting people, because it's amazing, like when I ask someone to like host an event, if I say, actually, that means we need you to do 3 things, then they're much more willing to do it than they would be if I said, I need you to host an event, and it's nebulous and it's scary. Whereas the reality is, I need you to pick what you want to do and tell me what you're going to do so we can advertise it, and then please go. You know, I mean, it's not, so I think that it's helpful to us as volunteer leaders to have people who know what they need to do and thus are willing to do it, but it's also helpful to get people by being super clear. So,
Chris, do you want to talk?
Yeah, I think to build on their points a little bit, for me, succession planning is important. Meaning when you have it, as you begin to build your volunteer base, you want to keep them enthusiastic and engaged. So building on, the event planning may be the first thing, but then, what's next? Alumni Schools Committee, or how can you begin to work and rotate through the volunteers that you have that are active? And then thinking about, who's the next club president, because you want to be able to get that momentum, because you end up investing a lot of time to build the activity and build the engagement, and you want that to be sustainable. I think in the Tier 1, schools, or the Chicagos, the New Yorks, the Los Angeleses, it's a little easier. Once you get down to the Tier 2 schools, it requires a little bit more effort, because you have to mine a little bit more deeply to find the right volunteers and to get them engaged at the right level that you need to actually get done what you want to get done. And I think additionally, from an event perspective, keep it simple. That's, when I started it, doing this in Seattle, we actually co-president Saj Sahai, who's also on the board, and I started that together, and our motto was, if we can't do an event in collectively 4 or 5 hours of our time total to get it up and running and everything arranged, that's, then it's too much time and it's too complicated. And I think if you can therefore translate that to your volunteers to say, yeah, it sounds like a daunting task, but it actually isn't, because we don't want you to have, a full spread buffet for the, reception. We just, keep it simple, 1 entree or 2 entrees, depending on the food choices, et cetera. And that, I think, just makes it easier for people to get involved. And also knowing where to track them. The thing that I struggle with a lot, or did when I was in Seattle, is how do you make it more broad-reaching? How do we begin to connect the dots? It's one thing to program a chocolate tasting and a movie event, bringing in the Metcalf the Metcalf opportunities to read for Metcalf, to be an Alumni Schools Committee volunteer, and beginning to connect a lot of the other activities that are important to the university, number one, but also being able to bring those things together collectively, so you've got a lot more interaction amongst your alumni based on what they're doing and what they want to participate in. I don't think I've figured out how to do that yet, but that's one of the things that I'm excited about being up here, to be able to try to figure out how to do better. So I think we've got a lot of opportunity there. And I also want to hear about the affinity group, so hopefully you'll tell me what you're doing as well. It's exciting to me to hear about. So thank you.
So maybe why don't we open it up? What are the volunteer challenges you're running into, and what are the things that have worked for you in all of your various levels of involvement that you think others could learn from?
Well, I'm blessed with being in the volunteer board in Chicago and in New York, and now I'm in London. And so in New York, as a program chair, I used to organize 50 events a year, and we had no problem getting volunteers. And our monthly Young Alumni Happy Hour had 50 people show up on a random February Friday. Now I moved to a market where we only have 350 college alumni and about 200 other schools alumni and 500 booth alumni. So it's a very small population. It's very fragmented. And we're trying to build an organization, build continuity, build succession. When I'm scrapping for volunteers, right? It's like, hey, who's going to do this event? I guess well, that'd be me. So I think the keep it simple thing is really important in the smaller areas for London, for UK and London, because you still have the manpower and resources. So just do a small thing, maybe get a professor, or trying to get professors on travel schedules and having coffee with a professor, or something simple that we can just get a few alumni out. I'm also trying to use the ASC link and try to put the word out and get people hooked in by letting them please volunteer to interview people for the ASC, and then hopefully bringing them in to present other volunteer activities.
I sympathize being in Pittsburgh and a small market. In Philadelphia, I mean, in some ways it's a small market. And actually, one thing that we did that was really interesting in Philly that I think a lot of sort of non-Chicago clubs could do is, I mean, Pittsburgh, we're not big enough to get a Harper lecture. So we're not going to see a faculty member come through. But we have alumni who are doing fascinating things. And so, in Philadelphia, we had an alum, Erica Ockrent, who wrote a book called The Land of Invented Languages, and it, taught herself Klingon and all kinds of crazy stuff, and came and talked, and it was a great event. We did it. We had, probably 20 people there in an office that was donated by one of our alumni volunteers, and did a little bit of food, and she was fascinating. She took questions, and it was a lot more informal than it would have been, I think, otherwise, and it got a lot of people engaged, I think, that wouldn't have been otherwise. So that's something that I've seen success with.
So in the LGBT alumni network, the specific challenge that we faced was there was no way to easily identify membership. Not like it was on your track. We're part of one of the divisions or one of the schools. So that was the challenge that we faced. And the way that we overcame it and started to make some progress was building up from the grassroots, right? There was an initial strategy from the alumni house to actually reach out to some of the local clubs that they came to speak to us at the Chicago Club and said, look, we're starting up these affinity groups. If anyone would like to join, please contact us. And so we had a core group of maybe 5 or 10 people that were contacted through that initial communication. And then each of us started to work our networks. All of us actually had friends that were somehow affiliated with the university in some of the schools, but also identified and had an affinity with one of the letters of LGBT. And so it was sort of this organic growth. The group of the core 5 branched out, and those branches branched out. And so suddenly we have a membership of 900 or so people spread out across the country, but also in some pockets around the globe as well. And we're starting to work that network to continue the sort of organic growth. That's the challenges that we face and continue to face, so we're making a lot of progress in that. Both word of mouth, but also through electronic means as well.
Do you have a Facebook page?
We do, yes. Yeah, and one of the challenges on that end is actually monitoring the type of content that people on Facebook page.
I would just say, like, from my experience both in New York and then in Boston, don't underestimate the desire that people have to connect. I mean, most cities, through whatever means the university could provide me, I put out if you're in the not-for-profit, government, or public sector, and you want to connect, please email me at. In both cities, in New York, we have 100 members here, in Boston, we just got 50. So people, all I had to do was send me an email. Once I got the emails, I sent out a survey monkey about, do you want to meet? Do you want to do an event? Who's willing to help? But putting out that little easy, it's really easy then to click on my email and send me a note and say, yeah, I work for Senator so-and-so and I'd love to. And so I just collected this pool, but I made the first really easy and not daunting. Just, if you want to connect, let me know. And from that, I kind of am beginning to build a committee of people who want to do things and create networking events. So if you have an interest, and you're pretty sure that there are some other people who might have an interest, it's really easy to shoot out an email and get some feedback really quickly if that's an area. And then you can build in that area.
And how did you go though from volunteers who've given you an email address into volunteers who are actively engaged?
Well, in New York it was really easy because I could say, once I got people who said yes, they'd love to meet, I would figure out who has the most senior title and ask them if they would. You're the executive director of the Gay Men's Chorus. Excellent. Do you want to co-host this event with me on nonprofit management in the 90s? Cool. So we put somebody else's name on it. We'd say Lisa DeBar, and people would go. And so that sort of spiraled into somebody. Granted, this industry is people who then like to talk about what they do. So they would say, you know, I'm working on this really cool project. Could we do one in 3 months? I'd be like, sure. So it sort of grew from itself. So I think trying not to do it all yourself and trying to, just ask somebody to do something simple. When someone sees that person having success at doing it, as the person in the front of the room or the name on the invitation, it becomes like, oh, I could do that. I'd like to do that. Or, why didn't they ask me? So it almost becomes like an honor thing. And from that, then you kind of ask people when they say, well, why don't you get somebody who can do, resume review? That's a really great idea. Do you know anybody who does that? How about I connect you to CACs? And I'm here if you need me, but why don't you take the ball and run with that for a while? Because I can't do everything. But if it comes from them, and then you can help them figure out how to take that question and turn it into a plan. They may not know that they could call CAPS. They may not know that there's a career networking opportunities that are supported by the university. But if you can plug them in and then sort of nudge from behind, that becomes their event. That becomes their activity. And if they're successful, then they'll want to do another.
One thing that I found with another organization, we're trying to get people to do programs, and obviously that's a lot of what our clubs are out doing, is that people may have been willing to do a program, but they didn't know how to do it. And so I created a very detailed checklist that went through, and this is who you call. And we had to update it about once a year as staff, and the national organization changed and stuff, but which of course we have no experience with. But we just made a very detailed checklist. And so then when people said, oh, well, how do I do this? It's on the checklist. And then that's, again, sort of the demystifying how you get involved and what you do. Because it's not particularly really hard to plan a program, but if you've never done it before, it can be intimidating. What else? Go ahead.
For the Chicago Women's Alliance, we've tried to break the jobs down so that one person doesn't get overwhelmed with one job. So that when we have any given program, someone will be in charge of arrangement, someone else is in charge of hospitality. We do our programming as a board as a whole, that is, we sit around and talk about who we'd like to have for the next year and what kind of speakers. And since we try to have people from different schools and different subject areas on the board, we have some cross section of topics. Now, we are happy to have an event that only gets what some people may think is a Heisenberg process of over 25, and the sciences get out fewer people. But we still have science topics because we want to have something to present to those people. On the other hand, when we had an Egyptologist, in September we had around 50 people RSVP because that's a really interesting topic to a broader range of people. But we hope that by giving everyone a smaller job to do rather than be in charge of an entire event for one evening, that's pretty overwhelming. But if you want to be part of it and work together with regular board meetings, so there's exchange information ahead of the next program on what's going to be done, everyone else knows what to expect.
That's really the tip of breaking things down, and that way people don't feel alone too. If you're doing things together as a group, it can help ease in new volunteers.
I'll add to what Agnes said in terms of succession plans. We had our bylaws approved this past spring, so we are really formalizing lots of things. And job titles and job descriptions have helped us to find new members to take on directorships or to join committees, the committees that Agnes mentioned. So we have found that to be very successful.
Yeah, I'd like to also echo the notion of the importance of succession planning and kind of long-range planning, because I think that, I think that in most areas of the country, except perhaps New York, because New York is so big, there's only so many alumni, so many people who are going to volunteer, and I think that, I think that it's great to start any one of these groups, but I think that once you get into your third or your fourth year, and if it's the same 2 or 3 or 4 people that are driving it, I think that there's a burnout factor. People move, people's lives change, and I was one of the people who started the Life Sciences Alumni Group in Boston, and one of the things that we did from the very beginning is that we put it into the charter that whoever was in charge of the group actually had to step down after 2 years, and someone else actually had to take over. And I think that if you have a group, I think you really need to think about your long-range planning. If there's a core group of 5 or 6 people who are kind of running the group, not only do you need to rotate who's in charge, but you really need to be actively thinking about who are the next 1 or 2 people that we're going to recruit, maybe from the younger classes that are going to come in and sort of join a natural replacement cycle. That's a lot.
That's especially good timing for your remark, because we were just talking in the Alumni Board of Governors meeting yesterday about topics for these conference calls that we do with some of our club leaders. And we were talking about succession planning as a potential topic, so that's really helpful for us to hear that we should try to get that on for our next batch of calls. So it's really important.
I think something really useful for succession planning that I found with the Greek system, and this is really long range, it is using the undergrad groups that are related to what you're doing as sort of feeders, like young alumni feeders into your particular club. And so, I mean, I just know when I graduated, I didn't really know how to get involved, and I know that sort of reaching out to the younger alums, or the undergrads, in my case, the Greeks, and sort of telling them how they can get involved, demystifying it, sort of feeds them in earlier to your club. And then if you think long-term succession planning, if you get someone early and they become very invested, that's someone that you can sort of groom to take over later on. And I think that's a really great, potentially untapped resources. There's RSOs. I mean, there are a ton of RSOs that do all these different kinds of things.
And for those of us who aren't on campus all the time, it's a registered student organization, which is now the convention for how you identify student organizations.
So one of the ways we've done that exact thing in the LGBT alumni network is we've come to some of the events that had on campus for the LGBTQ Office of Student Life on campus. So they have a welcome back session every year at the start of the academic year, and a representative from our group has always gone and participated at that. Or sometimes we just send a letter that's read to the students to welcome them back. And then at the end of the year, they have what they call the rainbow graduation for people that spend lots of time in that house on campus, a special graduation ceremony. And we've gone to participate to that as well, to welcome them to the alumni community and invite them to join our network.
That's a great idea. So what other things have you seen working with volunteers, or what other challenges do you face that we could talk about?
Well, the SSA board, again, the divisional board, has been located in Chicago for the most part. And we've recently taken it national, and just this year are in various different cities around the country. And one of the things that we're trying to figure out is how do we not burn out that one person in that city who's trying to do everything that we as a board of 12 are doing here in Chicago. And so we've been trying to tap into the local University of Chicago clubs and to see what events are already going on that might have a hook for SSA graduates in the area, or what are the really simple events that we do here that only need like a place and some cookies and some coffee that they can take there. And trying to recognize that we have a lot of resources here, but they don't have it there, and how can we tap into the broader, what's already available in the rest of the university.
One thing that we were talking about at the Alumni Board of Governors meeting, and I know that some clubs have done, is using things that have happened on campus, because the University Communications Office videotapes a lot of events and has things on campus, and using that as the springboard for an event. I think they did that in maybe Cleveland, and getting people together and watching a video that the university's put together about things going on campus and then talking about it. Or even you could have an event where the provost program this afternoon is going to be taped. Or for your alumni club meeting, you could watch the video of today's presentation that Damon and Laura did about alumni engagement at the university. And so taking sort of, program in a box resources that the university has already made available, somebody else has already paid for the fancy editing. All you have to do is get people together and watch it and get some pizza or ask somebody to bring some brownies. Do one way.
I really do think
Another
that's
thing
true.
I'd add is the Chicago Women's Alliance has been successful in co-sponsored this.
And how have you gone about your co-sponsorships?
Well, sometimes it just happens, and sometimes we've gone out and, sought out a partner. We've co-sponsored a couple of events with the University of Chicago Women's Business School, because we have some overlapping membership and because we have, therefore, overlapping interests. A couple of years ago, when SSA celebrated its 100th anniversary, because we have a member from SSA on our board, she suggested that we have a special program in conjunction with Jane Addams Day, which in Illinois is in December, and that we invite the AAUW, which is doing things for that, and we ended up with Dean from SSA talking about the 3 women who were instrumental in forming the department. And it was a very interesting history lesson for those of us who weren't from SSA. And although we usually avoid December for meetings, this one kind of had me there, and that worked out really well. So, yeah, sometimes, and then we ended up at alumni weekend with Department of Gender Studies. There was a big
exhibit on the role of women.
Yeah, we co-sponsored with them. So sometimes you can just find something, and I think in another city, you do have a bigger problem, but you might even find another organization there that is doing something that you would be interested in.
Because you don't have to be limited to just University of
And
Chicago.
in Philadelphia, we definitely saw that a lot with sort of an Ivy Plus group. So, so they would do, a trivia tournament at a bar, and we'd send a Chicago team or something, or even just, staying on that list and letting people know what's going on, so that you're very much sort of piggybacking on things that are already happening, which makes it logistically more easy, but also offers more opportunity to a broader audience.
And the networking opportunities that a lot of our alumni are looking for, too.
One other thing we did, we do have the advantage of being in Chicago, but when we had the speaker come from the Oriental Institute, I called them and offered them co-sponsorship, which cost them nothing, absolutely nothing. They were sent, but they put it on their website and sent it out to the Oriental Institute members. So it was a way of getting more publicity.
That's great. Okay.
Okay.
All right, so one more comment and then we'll wrap up.
No?
All right, so first of all, thank you all for coming to Volunteer Caucus to begin with. It's sort of pointless for us to put together a caucus if no volunteers actually come. So thank you for coming, and we hope that you will share your feedback on the survey that you'll get afterwards. So as the Alumni Board of Governors and the staff evaluate caucus for future years, we can use your input. Thank you for coming to the session. So the next session is the provost of the university, and I think it's actually in the courtroom now, but if you head down back towards the auditorium, I'm sure there will be a helpful staff person or volunteer to direct you. So thank you.
Thank you.